What if the woman who once vowed to modernize the monarchy became the reason it nearly collapsed from within? That's not a metaphor. That's not tabloid gossip. That's not another petty PR drama. This is a story of power, paranoia, betrayal, and a royal reckoning no one saw coming. At the center, Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. But this time, no staged photos, no podcasts, no curated docuseries. This time, she wasn't in control of the narrative. Scotland Yard was. And the voice that shattered her glossy facade? Prince Harry's. Not an enemy, not a bitter ex, but her husband. The man who once said he'd burn the palace down if it meant protecting her. The man who now found himself holding a recording he couldn't ignore, a recording that changed everything. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because this time, the stakes weren't reputational. They were personal. They were dangerous. And they were criminal. Let's rewind. How did we get here? How did a woman who captivated the world with her wedding, her speeches, her talk of compassion and empowerment become the subject of a royal security investigation? And how did Catherine, beloved by the nation, yet often silent amid chaos, become the alleged target of what some insiders are now calling a commercially motivated character assassination plot? You read that right. Because according to confidential sources, ones close to both camps, this wasn't just another feud. It wasn't a petty jab over fashion, family protocol, or titles. This time, it was about money, market share, global influence, and a war brewing beneath the surface between two duchesses, one adored for her quiet consistency, the other for her media-savvy ambition, suddenly erupted into something darker, something terrifying. Whispers of voice notes, leaked threats, deleted emails, court-sealed affidavits. Catherine's security detail doubled. Meghan's legal team reportedly scrambled. And Harry? Torn, tortured, then resolute. So let me ask you this. How far would someone go to protect their empire? Would they fight in court? Would they leak to the press? Would they silence a rival before she had the chance to launch? And if that rival was your sister-in-law, would you risk your freedom to do it? Because here's the explosive truth unraveling behind closed palace doors. Sources now claim that Meghan Markle threatened to destroy Catherine's public image, and worse, if she moved forward with a rival lifestyle brand that, in internal market projections, could dwarf Meghan's own struggling ventures. Sounds too twisted to be true? That's what the royal family thought, until Prince Harry walked into the drawing room at Windsor Castle with a phone in his hand and an audio file that would shake the monarchy to its core. But before we dive into that confrontation, let's rewind the clock to understand why this all happened. Because nothing, absolutely nothing, explodes overnight. It started, as most things do these days, with a brand. Not a scandal, not a family betrayal. A brand, a commercial idea, an innocuous buzz in the air that Catherine, ever the enigma, ever the strategist, was exploring a wellness and lifestyle brand of her own. Nothing confirmed. No logos. No press releases. But the right people were talking. British retailers, organic farmers, mid-tier luxury designers with ties to the palace. And one particular leak that caught fire. The Kensington team had secured multiple domain names tied to Catherine's initials and keywords like natural, home, and sustainable. Insiders say the quiet strategy mirrored the future queen herself. Classy, under the radar, but meticulously planned. And very, very serious. Now, you might be wondering, so what? Meghan already had a lifestyle brand in the works. She'd trademarked archetypes. She'd teased cookbooks and beauty lines. So why panic? Why explode? Here's the thing. Catherine's entry into the same space wasn't just competition, it was existential. Because unlike Meghan, Catherine still had the one thing Meghan craved most, but couldn't reclaim: the crown. Not literally, but symbolically. To British consumers and international royal watchers, Catherine was the image of stability, authenticity, and future leadership. Her choices weren't seen as calculated. They were trusted. Meghan? She had flair. She had PR muscle. She had bold ideas. But after the Spotify collapse, the Netflix implosion, and mounting criticism about her lavish lifestyle clashing with her humanitarian branding, her name wasn't just a brand. It was a liability. So imagine her reaction. Sitting in Montecito, watching headlines tease that Catherine's brand was already being positioned as the real royal wellness empire. Imagine the fury. Imagine the threat. And that's when things began to spiral. The panic began privately. Then it got dangerous. Sources close to the Sussex household describe a sharp shift in Meghan's demeanor. Paranoid, obsessive, desperate to know what Catherine's team was planning. Requests for staff to monitor news leaks. An alleged order to find out who's funding her. One insider, now under legal gag, claims she overheard Meghan on a call saying, "If she launches before me, it's over. And if she thinks I'll let her humiliate me again, she's wrong." These weren't just the anxious musings of a woman under pressure. They were perceived as warnings. And someone was listening. Because what came next wasn't just drama. It was the moment Prince Harry stopped being a bystander and became the accidental detonator of a royal time bomb. So why did Harry turn? Why would the man who defied his family, defended Meghan in public, and followed her across continents, now be the one to expose her? Simple. Because he heard something he couldn't unhear. On a quiet evening in Montecito, while Meghan was upstairs reviewing branding drafts, Harry was downstairs. Alone. Quiet. Reflective. He was scrolling through voicemails. Routine. Until he tapped the wrong button and accidentally played a voice note Meghan had recorded, but never sent. In it, a chilling monologue. Not just frustration. Not just jealousy. But an obsession with Catherine's destruction. The transcript, now part of a sealed investigation, allegedly includes the words, "She thinks she can take my space. I'll take her peace. She launches, I launch war." Those words hung in the air like a dagger. For Harry, it was no longer about business. It was about a line being crossed. A line that even Diana, his late mother, so often invoked by Meghan, would never have crossed. So Harry did the unthinkable. He saved the message. And then, he made the call. That call changed everything. It wasn't to his press team. Not even to his therapist. It was to Prince William, the brother he hadn't spoken to in months. The one he'd insulted in interviews. Accused of cruelty. Abandonment. But in that moment, none of that mattered. Because he knew. Whatever was happening between Meghan and Catherine, it had gone too far. The call was brief. Tense. Stilted. But William heard what he needed to hear. And when the phone clicked off, a plan was already in motion. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if your brand wasn't just a business, but a battlefield? That's what the royal family is now quietly grappling with. Because the war that erupted between Meghan Markle and Catherine, Princess of Wales, didn't begin with titles, tiaras, or tabloid tantrums. It began with turmeric lattes. That's right. One discreet conversation, overheard at a high-end sustainable food summit in Cornwall, was all it took. A source close to a senior member of Catherine's Kensington team mentioned the words organic wellness initiative and homegrown British elegance. The room fell silent. Why? Because that kind of phrasing doesn't just float around palace corridors. That kind of phrasing signals a launch. And not just any launch. A direct hit at the very heart of Meghan's long-struggling lifestyle empire. Here's what most people missed. While the tabloids obsessed over fashion faux pas and seating charts, Meghan Markle had been quietly assembling a new commercial play. After the implosion of her Spotify deal and archetypes barely making a dent in the saturated wellness space, she was preparing a rebrand of a rebrand. A new Meghan, a new platform, rumored to include luxury skincare, wellness retreats, a podcast revival with a celebrity co-host, and her signature product line, Meghan's Method. Trademark applications had been filed. Instagram teasers were being drafted. Influencer partnerships negotiated behind NDAs. This was supposed to be Meghan's Phoenix moment. Her reset. Her chance to prove she wasn't just a former duchess clinging to old press clippings. She was ready to dominate the luxury lifestyle world, particularly in America, where she still held star power in elite circles. But then came the whisper. The first domino fell during a phone call between two brand consultants. One in London, one in Bath. Nothing explosive, nothing dramatic. But the name Catherine came up, followed by the phrase, "Elegant sustainability meets future queen branding." The Bath consultant paused. "You mean that Catherine?" "Of course. Who else?" From that moment, panic set in, not in London, but in Montecito. Because that single whisper confirmed what Meghan had long feared. Catherine was entering the same space. And she wouldn't need PR stunts or paparazzi walks to sell it. She had something more powerful: credibility. Now imagine you're Meghan. You've been fighting for your reputation, your marriage, your place in the world's most scrutinized family. You walked away from royalty to find your voice. You told Oprah your truth. You weathered mockery, lawsuits, and Hollywood's cold shoulder. And just when you were rebuilding, just when you had your comeback planned to the last curated Instagram tile, your sister-in-law decides to compete. Not accidentally, not quietly, but in a way that, insiders say, would have obliterated Meghan's potential market in Europe. Why? Because Catherine didn't need to hustle, or explain, or perform. She simply had to show up, and the world would buy whatever she was offering. Organic candles? Sold out. Children's charity collab? National media frenzy. Luxury linen robes made in Kent? Vogue cover incoming. Let's talk numbers. Because this wasn't just personal, it was financial. Internal marketing projections reportedly showed that Catherine's brand, if launched with even moderate palace backing, could reach £48 million in its first year. Meghan's team? They were struggling to crack £4 million, even with celebrity endorsements. Think about that. The woman Meghan once claimed silenced her was now about to eclipse her in the one domain Meghan had left: commercial relevance. And it wasn't just about product. It was about narrative. Catherine, the quiet force behind the camera, was finally stepping forward. And Meghan? She wasn't just being upstaged. She was being erased. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because the rivalry didn't stay within the realm of brands and business. It mutated. It grew teeth. It became obsessive. Sources close to Meghan's inner circle began to notice changes. Paranoia, constant phone checking, late-night strategy calls with celebrity PR firms. Increasing frustration with Harry, who was reportedly growing tired of the endless me versus them conversations. Then came a memo, an internal one, written in sharp, lawyer-approved language. Subject line: Catherine K. Direct interference and brand risk assessment. Let that sink in. Meghan's own business team had begun evaluating Catherine, not as a royal family member, but as a commercial threat. That memo, according to one ex-staffer, included phrases like risk of narrative displacement. Public perception of authenticity heavily favors CK. Must act preemptively to establish differentiation, eliminate overlap, and neutralize crossover appeal. Neutralize. Not compete. Not outmarket. Neutralize. And that's when alarm bells started ringing. Let me ask you something. Have you ever seen someone so determined to protect their legacy that they start to see allies as enemies? Have you ever watched a person unravel in the name of control? Because that's what staffers say began happening in Montecito. Meghan wasn't just planning her launch. She was trying to stop Catherine's. Through what exactly? That's still under investigation. But whispers began to swirl. Threatening messages sent through intermediaries. Leaks planted in UK gossip columns hinting Catherine was boring and out of touch. Pressure on mutual contacts to distance themselves from any overlapping brand involvement. Even one fashion designer, long associated with both women, allegedly received an email suggesting they choose carefully which duchess to align with moving forward. And while all of this unfolded, Catherine said nothing. No statements. No corrections. She appeared at charity events. She released a campaign about early childhood education. She smiled for the cameras and returned home to her children. But behind the scenes, Kensington Palace was watching. Because this wasn't Meghan and Kate trading jabs over tiaras anymore. This was a full-on commercial chess game. And someone had made a dangerous move. Because just as Meghan's team was preparing to launch their new campaign, a domain name quietly registered in the UK set off alarm bells. Not just among marketers, but among lawyers. The name? Royal-rooted co.uk. And who owned it? A shell company tied directly to Catherine's private secretary. The same one who managed her most high-profile charitable endeavors. Suddenly, Meghan wasn't fighting a ghost. She was facing a competitor with palace precision, strategic elegance, and royal immunity. That's when things snapped. According to palace insiders, Meghan began making urgent calls to her former legal team in the US. One source claimed she demanded a pre-launch strategy that would crush any competing royal branding for at least 18 months. Another said she was openly furious that the palace hadn't stepped in to protect her interests. Yes, you heard that right. The woman who left the monarchy claimed she was being betrayed by a monarchy she had voluntarily walked away from. Talk about contradictions. And then, in a now infamous exchange, Meghan reportedly told a business associate, "If she opens a brand, she opens a war, and I'll be the one holding the match." So let's review. Catherine, beloved and reserved, quietly builds a lifestyle empire with legacy at its core. Meghan, ambitious and bold, fights to preserve her space in the global market, only to see herself eclipsed before she even launches. And Harry, caught in the middle, trying to support his wife, trying to make peace with his family. And then, that night, he stumbles upon a recording, one Meghan never meant him to hear, one that would force him to choose between silence and truth, between loyalty and justice, between protection and prevention. But what Harry did next would shake the palace to its core. How do you know when ambition turns into obsession? Is it when you check your phone every 5 minutes, waiting for news that hasn't broken yet? Is it when you start seeing enemies in every shadow, competition in every smile? Or is it when you stop trusting the one person who stood beside you through everything, your husband? Because according to multiple insiders, that's exactly what began to unfold inside the Montecito mansion. A slow, quiet unraveling. But make no mistake, this wasn't a meltdown in the dramatic, table-flipping Hollywood sense. This was precision panic, controlled chaos, and Meghan Markle was at the center of it, orchestrating a desperate strategy to kill the competition before it could breathe. It all began with a single article, a quiet little piece in a niche European lifestyle magazine, barely noticed by mainstream media. The headline? A Future Queen's Quiet Revolution. How Catherine is Redefining Royal Wellness. It wasn't sensational. There were no accusations, no flashy photos, no anonymous quotes. Just a calm, beautifully written portrait of a woman exploring sustainable British partnerships, supporting small family farms, and laying the groundwork for what the author described as a subtle but powerful evolution of royal influence. There was no product announcement, no brand launch, no names dropped. But for Meghan, it may as well have been a declaration of war, because she read between the lines. She saw the future headlines, the Vogue spreads, the influencer buzz, the glowing Daily Mail pieces about Catherine's authenticity. And she knew what was coming, a brand war she couldn't win. That night, Meghan didn't sleep. According to a staff member who has since left the household, Meghan stayed in her office for nearly 6 hours, reviewing notes, timelines, PR drafts. She called her LA-based branding advisor at 1:37 a.m., then her agent, then her attorney, one after the other. The calls weren't casual. They were urgent, because that small article, harmless to most, confirmed her worst fear. Catherine was preparing to launch quietly and crush loudly. No marketing blitz, no media circus, just a calm rollout that would dominate the conversation without ever trying. And that was far more dangerous than anything Meghan had anticipated. This is where the obsession took root. According to sources inside the Sussex business circle, Meghan ordered a full digital sweep of any domain names registered in the UK over the last 90 days with connections to royal, green, natural, organic, wellness, or Kensington. A spreadsheet of 1,423 domains was created within 48 hours. Staffers were instructed to highlight suspicious ones. Color-coded tabs were added. Catherine's initials flagged. Possible shell companies were traced to lawyers with past ties to the Royal Foundation. Meghan wasn't theorizing anymore. She was hunting. And when asked what the goal was, one insider claimed she said, "Find the brand. Destroy it before it lands." Meanwhile, Catherine continued to move in silence. She hosted a charity gala, visited a neonatal unit, was photographed hugging a child. No product in hand, no website launches, but each appearance drove Meghan deeper into a spiral. Because the world loved her, still, unconditionally, and Meghan's commercial empire, built on grievance, reinvention, and fragile Hollywood alliances, was collapsing in on itself. The Spotify deal was gone. The Netflix buzz had cooled. Her Archwell Foundation was under review. And now, her own husband had started pulling away. Harry noticed the change almost immediately. Their once playful conversations now sounded like business meetings. Meghan's laughter, once spontaneous, became rare. She was obsessed with Catherine, not just competitively, but viscerally. Every move Catherine made was dissected, analyzed, deconstructed for strategy. Harry, reportedly, urged her to focus on their own lane. But Meghan saw only one path: eliminate the threat. That's when she started reaching out to influence disruptors, PR tacticians known in Hollywood for their ability to derail narratives without fingerprints. YouTube influencers, podcast gossipers, mid-tier celebrity stylists with an axe to grind. And yes, even former royal staffers who'd left the palace with bitterness in their hearts and bank accounts to fill. Meghan began cultivating a network of attack dogs. And the instructions were allegedly simple: shape the conversation before she does. But Catherine wasn't playing the same game. She never responded. She didn't clap back. She didn't leak. And that silence? That calm? It was driving Meghan mad. Because how do you fight someone who refuses to enter the ring? Meghan began questioning everyone. Aides, advisors, her own assistant. One former employee described being interrogated about unauthorized conversations with a British journalist. Meghan allegedly installed a new layer of encryption on her messaging apps. And most notably, she began excluding Harry from brand planning meetings. Not formally, but slowly, subtly, like a wedge being driven between them, bit by bit. And then, the moment that turned obsession into catastrophe. According to two independent sources, Meghan recorded a voice note in a private brainstorming session, a memo meant for her lead branding strategist. It was never sent, but it was saved, and it was chilling. In the voice note, Meghan allegedly said, "Catherine's trying to destroy everything I've built. If she moves forward, I won't sit still. This is war. She launches a brand. I launch something bigger. Something that ends her before she begins." Let that sink in. Ends her before she begins. Now, Meghan likely meant it metaphorically. A commercial takedown. PR sabotage. But the language? The tone? The phrasing? It left little room for misinterpretation, especially when it was discovered by Harry. You already know how. You've heard the whispers. Harry, home alone. Meghan out at a charity event. He scrolls through her recordings folder, looking for a note he left for their podcast editor. Instead, he finds that voice note. He listens once, then again, and what he hears is not the woman he married, not the fighter, not the victim, not the survivor of tabloid abuse. What he hears is a woman consumed, a woman willing to burn her family down to protect a brand. And that's when everything changes. Harry didn't say anything for 2 days. He kept the voice note, saved a copy, hid it. He watched Meghan go through the motions, photo shoots, calls, meetings. But something inside him cracked, not just because of what she said, but because he finally saw what she'd become, and what this rivalry was doing to both of them, to him, to Catherine, to the royal family. Then, something unexpected happened. A longtime friend from the UK, an ex-army mate, called Harry. Nothing major, just checking in. But during the call, he casually asked, "Is it true about Catherine's brand? We're hearing all sorts of chatter." Harry paused, then asked, "What kind of chatter?" The friend hesitated. "That Meghan's not going to let it happen. That something big is about to drop. Some are saying she's threatening more than just press." Silence. Because in that moment, Harry knew the voice note wasn't a private venting session. It was part of something bigger. A campaign, a strategy, and possibly a crime. But what Harry did next wouldn't just betray Meghan. It would tear open the royal family's deepest wounds. It would expose the truth behind the silence. And it would set off an investigation that reached from California to Kensington Palace and straight into the heart of the monarchy. What do you do when the person you vowed to protect becomes the one people need protection from? That was the question tormenting Prince Harry as he stared at his phone in the dim silence of his Montecito study. The voice note had been played 3 times already. Each time, the words hit harder. She launches a brand. I launch something bigger, something that ends her before she begins. Not a press statement, not a public declaration, a private recording. Low, controlled, calculated. Harry knew Meghan didn't mean it literally, or at least he told himself that. But tone matters, and there was something cold in her voice, something he couldn't ignore anymore. Not after everything, not after the promises he'd made. Let's rewind. Prince Harry had built his entire post-royal identity on one idea: protecting Meghan. From the tabloids, from the institution, from racist attacks, from the pressures that had, according to him, nearly destroyed her mental health. He'd cut ties with his brother, moved across the world, given explosive interviews. He'd said again and again, "I had to do everything I could to protect my wife." But now he was staring down the possibility that the woman he'd once described as the best thing that ever happened to me had gone too far. And the person in danger wasn't her. It was Catherine, the sister-in-law he'd barely spoken to in over a year. The same Catherine who once whispered to him in the pews of St. George's Chapel, "Whatever happens, we're still family." That night, Harry didn't sleep. He wandered the house. From the garden to the kitchen to the staircase where Archie once sat with his toy lion. The same staircase where Meghan had once tearfully told him, "They'll never let me win." He believed her then. Every word. He'd gone to war for her. But now, he couldn't tell if the war was still about justice or about vengeance. And if it was the latter, how long before it swallowed them all? The next morning, Meghan noticed something. Harry was distant, polite, gentle, but off. She asked if something was wrong. He said he was tired. She smiled, made a green smoothie, and started a Zoom call with her LA stylists. Harry didn't mention the voice note. Not yet. Not even when she casually said, "They're saying Catherine's brand is going to tank archetypes. But I'm not worried. I've got ideas they couldn't dream of." He didn't reply, didn't even look up. He just stared at the ceiling. Because in that moment, he wasn't just Harry, the husband. He was Harry, the son of Diana. The boy who had watched a woman suffer in silence until it crushed her. And the man now watching history threatened to repeat itself. So what did he do? First, he made a copy of the voice note, stored it on a secure drive, password protected. Then he reached out to someone he hadn't spoken to in months. His therapist. Yes, Harry's therapy journey is well known. He's spoken about it openly. But this session? This one wasn't about trauma from the past. It was about the present, about guilt, about fear, about how you hold love in one hand and accountability in the other, and realize they might be tearing each other apart. The therapist didn't tell him what to do, but she did ask, "What would you want someone to do if this voice note was about Meghan?" That question broke something in him, and he knew he had to act, but not yet, because the royal world doesn't move in a straight line. Not for Harry, and especially not for William. The last time the brothers spoke, it was over a short call about Prince George's school fundraiser. Before that, a cold exchange at King Charles's coronation. And before that, the infamous confrontation at Nottingham Cottage, the alleged shoving incident that Meghan would later tell Oprah was never truly resolved. But this wasn't about petty arguments. This was bigger. This was urgent. So Harry opened his phone, scrolled to William's number, paused, then typed, "We need to talk." Not about us. It's about her. It's serious. He hit send. What happened next? Silence. For 12 hours. No reply. No typing bubble. Just silence. Harry tried to distract himself. Played with Archie. Rewatched old videos of Diana. Sat by the koi pond, wondering if maybe he was overreacting. Maybe it was all just stress. Just a bad recording. But deep down he knew. Then, at 2:12 a.m. UK time, the message came. From William. Short. Formal. "Call me." Alone. Harry did. And for the first time in nearly a year, the two brothers spoke. Not as rivals. Not as broken men standing on different sides of a royal battlefield. But as sons. As husbands. As protectors. The conversation was cautious at first. Tension laced every word. Harry apologized. Not for the past, but for the silence. William didn't reply to that. Then Harry said, "There's something you need to hear." He played the voice note. Held the phone up. No context. No preamble. Just Meghan's voice. Cold. Confident. She launches a brand. I launch something bigger. Something that ends her before she begins. The line echoed across the Atlantic. William didn't speak for a full minute. Then he said, "Is that what she really thinks?" Harry replied, "I don't know what she thinks anymore." And that was the breaking point. Not for William. For Harry. Because in that moment, he realized something painful. He hadn't just lost his brother. He hadn't just lost his place in the royal family. He'd lost himself. In the name of love. In the name of loyalty. And now, the price of silence was getting too high. William didn't yell, didn't lecture. He simply asked, "What do you want to do, Harry?" And Harry replied, "I want to make this right." A beat of silence. Then William said, "Then come home. Let's talk." In person. 3 days later, Harry flew to London. Alone. No security detail. No media alert. He arrived at Heathrow under a different name. A driver took him to Windsor. And when he walked through the gates, there was no crowd. No pomp. Just William. Waiting. Hands in pockets. Eyes tired. But open. What happened inside that room remains classified. No staff. No phones. Just two brothers. And one device. A phone holding a voice note that could shatter the image of a duchess and expose a plot deeper than anyone imagined. And when the conversation ended, William didn't say anything. He simply took the phone, nodded, and picked up the palace line. Who he called next? Not Charles. Not Catherine. He called a private security liaison with ties to MI5 and the Metropolitan Police. Because William knew. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was a potential threat. And even if Meghan hadn't meant it literally, it had to be investigated. Meanwhile, Meghan had no idea. She thought Harry was visiting a sick friend in Geneva. She even sent him photos of Archie dressed as a pirate, captioned, "Your mini-you." But the Harry she once knew, the one who would die before betraying her, was gone, replaced by a man who had finally seen enough. He wasn't out for revenge. He was out for truth. But what no one knew yet was that the voice note was just the beginning. Because once the palace security team opened the file and traced the metadata, they discovered something far more dangerous. Something embedded in the file name. A code. A pattern. A hint at a digital war room Meghan had allegedly built. And what they found next would send shockwaves through the monarchy and force Scotland Yard to act. What if the one piece of evidence that could end it all came from your own lips? In a world governed by whispers, NDAs, and curated PR statements, truth is rarely spoken out loud. But when it is, when someone captures it raw, unfiltered, unintentional, it doesn't just echo. It detonates. And Meghan Markle's voice note? It was the fuse. Not because she yelled, not because she confessed, but because of the cold, surgical way she articulated her plan. The voice note was never meant for the public. It wasn't for her PR team. It wasn't for Harry. It was, according to sources, a late-night draft memo she recorded alone as part of a brand blueprint for countering Catherine's rumored lifestyle launch. But in trying to plan her comeback, she may have signed her own downfall. Let's break down what was actually said. The audio is roughly 2 minutes and 19 seconds. It begins mid-thought, clearly part of a larger brainstorming session. Meghan's voice is composed, crisp, no hesitation, and that's what makes it terrifying. If she launches before I do, the market turns. They'll call her the real Duchess, the authentic one. I become the afterthought. So far, this sounds like standard brand strategy. Worried about competition? Totally normal. Then it shifts. The tone tightens. The language changes. She thinks she's untouchable because she's quiet, because she wears beige and keeps her mouth shut. But people forget. I know how this game is played. I know what buttons to push. Still a bit sharp, but nothing explosive yet. Then comes the line. She launches. I launch something bigger, something that ends her before she begins. Let's pause right there. It's not the words alone that stunned investigators. It's the context. Because remember, this isn't a tweet, not a public-facing message. It's Meghan, unfiltered, speaking to herself, plotting, strategizing. No audience, no image to uphold, just pure intent. And that's what made Scotland Yard take it seriously. But how did it even land in their hands? After Harry handed the recording to William, the palace security team got involved. But before alerting external authorities, they had to authenticate it. So they ran it through a series of digital forensic tools. Timestamp analysis confirmed the recording was created 2 weeks after the Catherine brand rumors intensified. Device signature matched to Meghan's personal phone. Location metadata. Montecito, late night. Everything checked out. And the most disturbing detail? The file name. Not note for team or brand memo. The file was named nplan1_quietlaunch.m4a. Let that sink in. Nplan. Not strategy. Not pitch. Nplan. And that was enough to escalate this from a family feud to a potential threat investigation. So what happened next? Scotland Yard was discreetly contacted via an intermediary linked to royal security. They were told to evaluate the recording independently without briefing the Home Office or public officials. The stakes? Too high. Leaks? Guaranteed. Reputation damage? Nuclear. The palace wanted silence, but it also wanted safety. So the Yard agreed. And within 72 hours, a 4-person team specializing in digital threats and domestic security arrived in Windsor under code cover. They weren't investigating Meghan's words. They were investigating her intent. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Even if Meghan didn't mean to physically harm Catherine, even if end her was metaphorical, the threat of destabilizing a royal figure through commercial sabotage can still be considered an act of malice, especially if it includes premeditation, digital interference, and third-party collaborators. Let's talk about what they found, because this wasn't just one voice note. It was a trail. Once they accessed the encrypted drive where the audio was stored, the investigators uncovered 3 other voice notes, a draft legal outline called Pre-Launch Defensive Options, a PR memo labeled Neutralize Competitive Narrative Before UK Press Adopts It, and perhaps most disturbing, a contact list of influencers, journalists, and ex-palace aides, labeled Phase 2 Deployment if CK persists. CK, Catherine, not just a competitor, a target. Now pause. Ask yourself this. How do you think Catherine reacted when she was told? We're told she was briefed at Sandringham during a quiet weekend away with her children. The news was delivered by her personal protection officer. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. According to insiders, she simply closed her eyes and said nothing for 2 full minutes. Then she asked, "Has Harry seen this?" The officer nodded. "Did he give it to you himself?" Another nod. "Then we do nothing. We let the palace decide." Classic Catherine. Controlled, dignified, but behind those calm eyes, a storm. Because while she said do nothing, her security was quietly doubled that same week. And her children's school routes? Altered. Meanwhile, in Montecito, Meghan still had no idea what had been triggered. She was preparing a photo shoot, finalizing her new product's logo. She posted an Instagram story, smiling with her dogs, sipping tea. But Harry? He wasn't smiling. He hadn't smiled in days. He was walking a tightrope now, knowing that the woman he loved was being scrutinized by forces far bigger than family. Forces that don't care about palace politics. Just facts, motives, threat levels. And Meghan, whether she knew it or not, had crossed into dangerous territory. Then came the moment that changed everything. A former Archwell staffer, no longer under NDA, reached out to the palace. This person, whose name remains protected, provided emails that backed up the narrative in the voice note. In one email chain, Meghan allegedly instructed a staffer to draft a strategy that creates a brand fog around Catherine. Nothing too obvious, but enough to shift public trust. Another message read, "Time her downfalls. Keep our content polished while hers looks reactive." And that's when the investigation changed labels. From PR malpractice to strategic targeting. Still not a criminal charge, but enough to bring in cybersecurity specialists. Because one phrase appeared in multiple places. Influence fog. Time strikes. Narrative collapse. This wasn't just shade. This was warfare, digital, reputational, and utterly personal. At this point, the palace had 2 choices. Handle it privately. Confront Meghan. Let it fade. Alert British law enforcement and initiate formal inquiry protocols. They chose option 2. Why? Because they had to. If anything happened to Catherine, or even if she were digitally smeared in a measurable way, and the palace had done nothing after seeing these materials, it would be criminal negligence. So the decision was made. A quiet handoff of all materials to British authorities, and a strategic delay in media narrative to keep the public from exploding. But they couldn't hide it forever. 2 days later, the Daily Mirror broke the story. Only the tip of the iceberg. Sources suggest royal family reviewing possible internal threats after Catherine's digital team detects suspicious activity. No names, no voice notes, but enough for the internet to start guessing. And Meghan? She read it at 6:48 a.m. on her iPad. By 6:50 a.m., she was on the phone with her crisis PR firm. By 6:55 a.m., Harry walked into the room, and she asked, "Do you think this is about me?" Harry didn't respond. And that silence? It was the loudest answer of all. But what neither of them knew yet was that the next step wasn't about speculation. It wasn't about whispers. It was about legal classification. Because Scotland Yard was preparing a case file, not just to assess Meghan's threat level, but to determine if she had crossed the threshold into criminal coercion. Yes, there's a law for that. If you attempt to manipulate or intimidate another person into abandoning their business or public role through threats, sabotage, or pressure campaigns, you can be charged, even if you never touch them, even if you smile in public, even if you post tea-sipping selfies in sunlit gardens. And the final twist? Inside the file, investigators found one last document. It wasn't a memo, not a recording. It was a handwritten note from Meghan to her brand strategist, scrawled across a torn notebook page. No date, no context, just 8 words. If she wins, I don't exist anymore. Not signed, but in her handwriting. And that line, that desperation, that obsession, it may have been what sealed her fate, because it confirmed what Harry had feared all along. This wasn't just business. This was personal, too personal. And what came next would make headlines across the world. Because one morning, outside a boutique in Beverly Hills, Meghan would be approached by 2 plainclothes agents, and the arrest would begin. How do you protect yourself from a threat you don't even know exists? That's the question that lingered like fog over Kensington Palace, as the investigation into Meghan's alleged campaign of digital sabotage began unfolding behind the scenes. And at the very center of this slow-burning storm was Catherine, calm, collected, unaware, smiling for the cameras, shaking hands, visiting hospitals, hugging children, living her life as a royal, a mother, and a future queen. Completely blind to the fact that across the Atlantic, in a Montecito mansion drenched in curated sunlight and PR staging, someone was plotting her downfall. Not just a reputational jab, not just a nasty headline, but a full-blown, calculated takedown. And yet, Catherine never wavered. To understand the scale of this betrayal, we need to step back into Catherine's world. From the outside, she's the epitome of grace under pressure. But those who know her, those truly close, describe something else entirely. Steel, a quiet resolve that doesn't need to scream, that doesn't chase headlines, that doesn't clap back with rage, but with resilience. She was built for this, but not even she could have anticipated the depths of what was brewing beneath her feet. Because while Catherine was planning charity visits and public speaking engagements, Meghan was allegedly planning her obliteration, strategically, surgically, and silently. And no one warned her. Not yet. The first subtle shift came in early spring. Catherine's private secretary noticed unusual online behavior. Not overt attacks, not obvious trolling, but curated confusion. Subtle but consistent comments across articles, blogs, and social media posts. Catherine doesn't innovate, she imitates. Where was this interest in wellness before Meghan mentioned it? Another copycat Duchess moment. Yawn. On the surface, it looked like random chatter. But internally, alarm bells started ringing. Because these weren't ordinary trolls. They were coordinated, created accounts, synchronized timestamps, language that mimicked U.S. influencer discourse, not British commentary. Something was off. Something felt planted. But Catherine? She brushed it aside. Let people talk. I'll let the work speak. And that's always been her ethos. Speak less. Do more. But behind the scenes, her staff wasn't as calm. Especially after discovering that certain collaborators had quietly withdrawn from early branding talks. Why? Because they were pressured to. By someone in LA. Someone whispering that working with Catherine might lead to reputational overlap and future brand complications. Translation? Get out while you can. Or lose Hollywood access. That kind of pressure doesn't come from nowhere. But even as her team raised concerns, Catherine remained focused. She had just launched her new early years initiative. She was balancing public life with 3 children. She was attending state functions, writing speeches, preparing for the King's Platinum Jubilee events. She had no time for whisper wars. And while the rest of the world treated the Kate versus Meghan narrative like reality TV, Catherine never played the game. She didn't have to. Because her power wasn't in flashy statements. It was in stability. And that terrified Meghan more than anything else. According to palace sources, Catherine's branding plan had been in the works for over 2 years. Quiet, deliberate, data-driven. A sustainable lifestyle platform, not for profit, but to set standards. Products vetted by British suppliers. Wellness programs tied to national health campaigns. Collaborations with young British entrepreneurs who couldn't afford flashy marketing. Catherine wasn't trying to sell herself. She was trying to uplift others. And that was the difference. While Meghan built a brand around her own narrative, Catherine built one around legacy. And in the court of public opinion, that matters. Because people are tired of personalities. They want purpose. And Meghan, despite her best efforts, couldn't escape the comparison. Still, Catherine had no idea just how deeply she was being targeted. That is, until she opened the wrong email. It arrived on a Thursday morning. From a familiar contact. Subject line: possible leak, you should see this. Inside, a forwarded screenshot. It was from a US-based influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers. Someone Catherine's team had been quietly courting for a potential soft collaboration launch. The screenshot? A DM allegedly sent by a Meghan-affiliated PR strategist. The message read, "Friendly advice, Catherine's brand is risky. Ties to her team may come under scrutiny. We suggest waiting until things clear. No threats, no demands, just veiled implications. Soft sabotage." Catherine stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't speak. Then she forwarded it to her private secretary with just one line. "Is this what we've come to?" From that moment on, things shifted inside Kensington Palace. Security meetings were quietly held. Digital sweeps were ordered. The team that normally managed Catherine's press releases was temporarily redirected to monitor potential infiltration points. Still, Catherine made no public changes. No statements. No delays. She showed up at a primary school with a smile the very next day. Spoke to parents. Hugged a teacher. And even as the tabloids speculated about Royal Rift, Part 94, she never blinked. Because Catherine had one rule. You can't control what people say. You can only control how you respond. But her protection team didn't share her calm. When Harry's voice notes surfaced, when the palace heard what Meghan had recorded, Catherine was briefed within hours. She was at Amber Hall when it happened, playing board games with her children. The security team entered quietly. They didn't play the voice note for her, not at first. They didn't need to. They simply laid out the timeline. The recordings, the memos, the influencer network, and most damning, the evidence that her own branding initiative had been targeted with a coordinated misinformation campaign. Catherine listened, calmly. Then she asked, "Has she broken the law?" The officer replied, "We're not sure yet." "Then don't escalate. Not until you're certain." Then she turned to her children and continued playing Monopoly. But the palace escalated anyway, because Catherine's silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. And behind the calm exterior, palace officials began building a defensive wall. Quiet meetings with Scotland Yard. Digital firewalls placed around Catherine's team. Lawyers on standby, not for civil court, but to prepare for criminal defense if needed. Catherine still didn't speak publicly. But make no mistake, she was preparing. And her silence? It wasn't avoidance. It was calculated power. Because if Meghan wanted a war of words, Catherine wasn't going to oblige. She was going to respond with action, with results, with the one thing Meghan's team couldn't replicate: trust. Meanwhile, behind closed palace doors, the monarchy was preparing for a new kind of crisis. Not a scandal about cheating, not a rogue prince in Las Vegas, but a modern assault, a digital campaign, an attempted character assassination against the woman slated to be queen consort. And that changed everything. Because if Catherine was vulnerable to that kind of attack, who else was? And if Meghan had the resources, the motivation, and the strategy, what else had she been planning? The palace no longer viewed this as family drama. This was a threat to the institution. And Catherine? She never flinched. She never went into hiding. She didn't cancel events. She didn't cry in public. She stepped into the spotlight more. She gave speeches with more fire. She met with small business owners, visited war veterans, appeared at climate summits. Because Catherine knew the truth. The best way to kill a rumor is to outlive it. And that's what she did. Every appearance, every handshake, every project, they were shields. Not of defense, but of dignity. The quiet dignity that Meghan, for all her charisma, could never mimic. Because it's not about branding. It's about belonging. And Catherine, for all the drama, all the jealousy, all the competition, had earned her place. Not with noise, but with silence, with grace, with service. But what came next would pull Catherine into the center of the storm. Because while she had remained above the chaos, Scotland Yard was about to act. And when they did, everything Catherine had tried to avoid would land right at her feet. What does a king do when his own son becomes both the whistleblower and the detonator? That was the question King Charles III faced the moment the briefing folder landed on his desk at Clarence House. The man who had spent his life preparing for the crown was now facing a crisis no monarch handbook could have predicted. Not a war, not a scandal involving mistresses, ministers, or misused funds, but something far more delicate, far more volatile. His youngest son had just exposed his daughter-in-law in a digital sabotage investigation, one that involved the future queen, and the family was already crumbling. It started with a phone call. 2 rings. No hesitation. "Your Majesty, we have a situation," the voice said. Calm, clipped. Palace intelligence. Charles was used to those words. He'd heard them too many times over the years. But this time, the voice continued. "It involves Meghan, and Catherine, and Harry." A pause. "There's audio." Charles had hoped, naively, that the worst was behind them. The Oprah interview, the Netflix docuseries, the coronation drama. He thought the waves had settled. But what he was about to hear wasn't waves. It was an avalanche, a recording, a paper trail, a potential crime. And the one who brought it all forward? Harry, the son who once accused the institution of cruelty, the son who left the monarchy in flames, the son who now wanted to save it. The irony wasn't lost on the king, nor was the pain. Charles listened to the voice note alone. No aides, no Camilla, just a man, a desk, and a recording. The moment Meghan's voice filled the room, the temperature shifted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't emotion. It was calculation. She launches. I launch something bigger, something that ends her before she begins. The king closed his eyes, not because he was shocked, but because he was tired. Tired of the war, tired of the tension, tired of watching his sons drift so far apart that even truth now came with a price. But he knew one thing. He had to act. Within hours, an emergency meeting was called at Sandringham. Not for courtiers, not for press officers, for family. The guest list was short. Prince William, Catherine, Harry, no Meghan, not invited. And for the first time since the Queen's funeral, the 3 core royals stood in the same room. Tense, silent, eyes avoiding each other. The king entered last. Aides cleared the room. What followed was not a discussion. It was an ultimatum. Charles began with calm but unmistakable force. "This ends now, before it burns us all." William didn't speak. Harry looked down. Catherine sat still, hands clasped, unmoving. Charles continued. "I have spoken with legal advisors, with Scotland Yard, with our digital intelligence team. The evidence is being taken seriously. This is no longer palace business. It is national security business." That word, security, hung in the air like a sword. Then he turned to Harry. "Is it true? Everything?" Harry nodded, softly, but decisively. "I didn't want to, but I couldn't ignore it." And Charles, wounded, weary, but resolute, delivered the line that would change everything. "Then you must cooperate fully. As a witness." Harry's jaw clenched. He hadn't expected this to escalate so quickly. He thought the family would handle it internally, quietly. He thought his recording would be a warning shot, not a legal trigger. But now it was bigger than him, bigger than all of them. William finally broke the silence. What if she denies it? What if she spins it as another royal attack? Catherine interjected, her voice calm but sharp. "Let her." Everyone turned to her. It was the first time she had spoken. "We've said nothing for years. Let her tell the world her version. The truth will speak louder." Charles gave a subtle nod. "You've always led with dignity, Catherine. That's why we will protect you." Then, to William, "You will not respond to the media. No statements. No counter-briefings. We rise above, but we do not remain passive." Finally, back to Harry. "You started this. You must finish it." The king handed Harry a sealed folder. Inside, a list of official contacts at Scotland Yard, a confidentiality agreement, a witness protocol guide, and a handwritten note. "Your duty is to the truth, not to loyalty." Not anymore. No signature, just a royal crest. Harry closed the folder. His hands shook, not from fear, from the realization that this moment, this decision, would forever rewrite his legacy. He wasn't just the spare. He was now the divider, or the healer, depending on what came next. Outside Sandringham, the press remained oblivious. They were chasing a different story, one about Meghan's rumored product launch and a potential podcast return. Headlines like, Meghan's comeback year? Archetypes 2.0. Can she win back the public? No one had the faintest idea that, behind palace doors, a royal intervention had just taken place, or that Meghan was now the subject of an active threat assessment. That was the brilliance of the palace machine. Smooth on the surface, turbulent beneath. Later that night, Charles spoke privately to Catherine. They sat in the garden under a canopy of stars. No staff, just a father-in-law and the woman who had become the crown's greatest stabilizer. You didn't deserve this, he said quietly. Catherine smiled softly. It's not about me. It's about what's right. He looked at her, saw the same strength he had once seen in Diana, but without the chaos. A quiet warrior. And he knew, in that moment, that the monarchy would survive because of her. But survival comes at a cost. The king returned to Clarence House and issued 2 orders. A full freeze on Meghan's access to royal estates, offices, and private correspondence. An intelligence audit of all staff transitions from royal departments to Archewell-affiliated ventures over the past 3 years. Why? Because if Meghan had quietly siphoned information, contacts, or insider strategy for her own brand ambitions, it was treasonous. Not in the medieval sense, but in the modern sense, a betrayal of trust, a weaponization of privilege. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Meghan was planning a launch party. She had no idea what had unfolded in Sandringham. She thought the storm had passed, that the palace had moved on, that Catherine would stay silent. And Harry? She believed he was still on her side, still protecting her, still playing the same game. She didn't know the king had spoken, didn't know her name was now on a sealed report delivered to Whitehall, didn't know that her arrest was being discussed, not as a possibility, but as a contingency, because the monarchy had made its choice. Family would always be family. But the crown comes first, and Meghan, in her quest for dominance, had crossed the one line no outsider ever should. She went after the monarchy's greatest asset, Catherine, and now, the king had drawn the sword. The investigation was active. Harry was cooperating, and the next call would go to Scotland Yard's Special Investigations Unit. But what came next wouldn't just shake Meghan's world. It would destroy the illusion of control she'd so carefully constructed. What if the person you hated most was the only one who could help you now? That's the twisted irony that hung in the air as Prince Harry stood at the wrought iron gates of Windsor Castle just after midnight. Hood up, head low, heartbeat pounding like a war drum in his chest. The last time he'd been here, it was under the glare of cameras at his father's coronation. Before that, the Queen's funeral, when every step beside William felt like walking on shattered glass. But tonight, there were no cameras, no ceremonies, no Meghan, no one except the brother he hadn't called by his first name in over a year, and the truth he carried in his hand, a phone with a voice note that had fractured the last bond he thought would never break. The gates creaked open, a soft nod from the guard. No announcement, no trumpets, just footsteps echoing in silence. Harry walked in slowly, almost reverently, like a child returning to the home he once escaped. Everything looked the same. But everything had changed. His brother was waiting. William stood under the archway, arms folded, eyes shadowed by the moonlight. No coat, no expression, just waiting. Harry approached slowly. No handshake, no hug, just space and tension. Years of it. Years of silence, insults, bitter interviews, and weaponized memoirs. But none of that mattered now. Not when the stakes were this high. Harry broke the silence. You heard it. William nodded. Twice. Another beat. I didn't want it to be real. Neither did I. And just like that, without apology, without ceremony, they were brothers again. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but united by something bigger than their feud. Catherine, and the threat that had been made against her. They walked down the gravel path, past the rose garden Diana used to love. They didn't speak for minutes, until William finally asked, "Do you think she meant it?" Harry hesitated. That question had haunted him for weeks. He wanted to say no, wanted to believe it was heat of the moment, brand panic. But that voice note, The documents? The influencer campaign? It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. So he said the only honest thing he could. I don't know, but I couldn't unhear it. William stopped, turned, and for the first time, Harry saw it. Not anger, not smugness, but something deeper. Fear. Do you know what it's like, watching your wife do everything right and still get pulled into this madness? Harry didn't answer. He didn't have to, because he finally saw it from the other side. All these years, he'd defended Meghan, blamed the press, blamed the crown, blamed William. But now he saw what it looked like, to be the brother left behind, trying to hold a family together while the other burned bridges on the other side.